there has been definitely some impact of them growing so close together and not getting enough nutrients. So this year, I intentionally made some mistakes when I planted my beautiful onions, and I'm going to pay the price. Or am I? Well, it's Harvest Day 2024, so we're going to find out whether those mistakes actually hurt me in the long run. Let's harvest some onions. But first off, why did I make these mistakes in the first place, especially intentionally? I researched a lot of videos on YouTube to find out what would happen if I did things wrong. They do tell you what you're supposed to do, but they don't always tell you the consequences of not doing the things that you're supposed to do. Secondly, I don't know whether they were technically mistakes or just things that I felt in my gut that I needed to do. For example, planting onions in a bus tray like this. It's really tiny, and the onions are pretty close together. And from the looks of things, it looks like the onions are a pretty decent size. And that's something I just felt I needed to do for a small vegetable like an onion, rather than grow it in something huge like this. Frankly, I just think it's a rebellious fate in me. I like to do things differently and see what works and what doesn't. And I like to show my work. I like to see what worked out and what didn't, because things don't always go right in the garden, and it's important to show what didn't work well. So that's what I did with my onions. And you can learn a lot about plant behavior by not exactly following the advice of the gurus. Learn things on your own. Your garden is your garden, and it's different from everyone else's garden. There are so many microclimates that might make your results different than the gardener next door. All right, so let's start with mistake number 1. They say timing is everything when it comes to onions, and that includes when you start your onions from seeds. In my Northern California climate, that is September, and I did start my seeds in September, but I did not take very good care of them. First off, I started them in plats because that's what the experts advise that you do. And the seedlings started to grow, and they grew really well, but then they all got affected by damping off disease. And because they were growing in those large flats, it took out all of the seedlings. So next time when I start from seeds, I'm going to be starting them in cells, and then hopefully the damping off disease will affect just the individual cells rather than take out the entire tray. The other thing that I didn't do properly was I did not fertilize them. I was still busy with my summer garden. I was busy with getting my fall garden going, and I just neglected my onion seedlings. I did not fertilize them. They did not grow very well. And come January, which is when I'm supposed to get my onion stalks in my planters, they were nowhere close to being ready. So I went desperately online, and I looked into my favorite place to buy onion transplants, which is Dixondale Farms. Not sponsored, but you can get amazing transplants from them. And because I was ordering so late in the season, they actually had a sale. So score. I got those transplants. They arrived within a week. I got them in the ground, and that's what you see over here that we're going to be harvesting today. But I'll also show you some of the onions that I started from seeds, because a few of them did make it. So now let's talk about the biggest mistake that I made this season. But before we do that, we're going to harvest this bus tray of onions, because I think I get a pretty decent harvest from this one. And before we do that, I sure would appreciate a like. Your support means the world to me. Now let's go ahead and harvest some onions. So yeah, this tray contains Ailsa Craig onions. These are short day onions, and we'll talk about the varieties in just a little bit. And they're sweet onions, and they're supposed to grow decently large. So let's see. Oh, they're already harvesting themselves. I let my onions dry for a couple of weeks before I harvest them, so you can see they're just coming right out. Ow. Nice and clean. Some little ones here. Look at that. Nice size. But sweet onions don't store as long as the less sweet onions, and they've got to be eaten fairly quickly. So I've got to finish eating most of my onions within the next 2 or 3 months or so. But those are the kinds of onions that my family likes eating the most, the sweeter onions. So that's what I'm growing. So this is what I call a pretty decent harvest for something as small as this bus tray. This is only a couple of feet long and 1.5 feet wide. So just about 7 or 8 inches tall. And this is frankly probably my best harvest is what I'm guessing. We're going to harvest the rest of these, but let me first talk about my biggest mistake. All right, so now let's talk about my biggest mistake. But before we do that, let me just educate you a little bit on the various types of onions, depending on your growing zone. So there are what's called short day onions, intermediate day onions, and long day onions. The short day onions start to bulb when day lengths reach 10 to 12 hours. The intermediate day onions, it's from 12 to 14 hours, and the long day onions are from 14 to 16 hours. Now, your longer days are typically the northern states, if you're talking about the United States. And those are places like Alaska, where you've got really, really long days during summer and hardly any nights. But where I live and further south, the day lengths tend to be shorter. I live in what's called the Goldilocks zone, 37 degrees north, and that is where you can grow either long day, short day, or intermediate day onions. Or so I thought. And I selected long day onions because they were the ones that had such great varieties. The large size, the Ailsa Craigs, the Walla Wallas, all of them long day onions that actually produce really large bulbs and are sweet. All the characteristics that I was looking for. But what I found out the hard way was that the 14 to 16 hour day length that these long day onions need happens during the latter part of June, during summer solstice. And after that, the days start to get shorter. So I was waiting for these onions to bulb and nothing was happening. June came along and that's typically when I harvest my onions, but there were no signs of bulbing. And then finally, the summer solstice came and that's when the onions started to bulb. And so they just didn't have time to reach their potential. And then finally, they started flowering because they were in the ground for so long and they thought that they were in their second season. Onions are biennial crops. They flower in their second season. So I ended up having all these beautiful blooms and hardly any bulbs. The other problem of having blooms is that the onions don't last long at all once the plant starts blooming. So, yep. Lesson learned, in future, I will be growing on the short day or intermediate day onions. Won't be growing long day onions again. And no, I won't be saving seeds for these. All right, so let's harvest some more onions and we'll talk about a couple more mistakes that I made. The first has to do with spacing of onions. The number one thing that onions hate the most is competition. So weeding is an absolute must. If you see any little weed, pull it out. But that also applies to onions being planted too close together. The larger onions will take away nutrition from the smaller ones and just not let them grow. So when I planted them, they were tiny little plants, and it was like chicken mat. I thought that they would fit into the space they'd need just about a couple of inches to grow. So I gave them about 3 inches of spacing, which was a big mistake. You can see that there are some large ones and the ones around them are kind of small. And that's partly because the large ones are pulling the nutrition, the moisture, and just not leaving enough for the ones right next to them. So next time, I'll be spacing them at least 4 to 6 inches apart. Now, the mistake that I made with not spacing them apart far enough could have been at least partially rectified if I fertilized them enough. And that was the last mistake, which is also a really big one, is I depended on the nutrients in my soil to be good enough to fertilize these onions, and they were not. But let's go ahead and pull out a few more and just see what we got. I'd say they're not terrible, but given that these onions are supposed to be the size of softballs, these are Walla Walla onions, there has been definitely some impact of them growing so close together and not getting enough nutrients. So like I said, onions that have flowers in them are going to degrade very rapidly. So these are going to be the first ones that I've got to use. I really wish I could have saved some of these for seed, but I really don't want to grow long day onions anymore. They're pretty onions though. All right. So I have a question for you guys. Why did the onions in the bus tray grow so much larger than the onions in the planter? These obviously had a lot of competition. They didn't have as much nutrients available to them, yet they managed to grow much larger, comparatively speaking, than the onions in the planter. I'm confused. I'll meet you down in the comments. Let me know what you think. Until next time, live green and love your greens. So I wanted to show you some of the onions that I had started from seed. These are red of Florence. They're surrounded by this Armenian cucumber that's growing all over the place, and this mystery squash that turned out to be a cantaloupe came out of my compost. The little treats the garden sometimes gives you. But I'm not sure whether these are ready yet. I am thinking that maybe they are, but there are a couple of small ones over there, and the leaves are still fairly green, so I'm thinking maybe I'll give them just a little bit more to see if they can grow a little bit larger. But I've got a good half a dozen or so of these red of Florence onions, and I'm keen to try them.